Once more unto the breach, dear friends. Okay, let's get started. So I will say, because either I'm very good at my job or very bad at my job, I'll leave you to decide and you can evaluate me on the spots. We're definitely going to be done the course a week early, so Friday is going to be la fin. There's no more lectures after Friday. Well, we'll see how we do today. Depends how fast I go. I'm stretching things pretty thin as it is, so I know you all want to come back on Friday for one more class, so we'll see if we can get through it all. I feel bad ending over a week early, but whatever. What can I do? I'll have office hours for every class until then, and you can come ask major lab questions or something. So yeah, definitely, like, I'll tell you at the end of class where we're at, and if not, you know, we'll go from there, and the rest will be help sessions. We'll call it that. I'm very helpful, and you know, you'll have an entire class to do the spots. So just take one whole class on Monday to do the spot survey. You can't say I didn't give you in-class time. Okay. Trying to think if there's anything germane that I need to talk about. Any questions about anything? I think everything's pretty straightforward and we've gone through, yeah. No, we're done. We're done. Yeah, no, that's a good question. I combined mini lab 5 and 6 into super mini lab 5, and so we're done. There's no more labs. And I don't think L'Oreal has given you all the feedback on that one, but I will instruct her to do so quickly. I was thinking of what metaphor doesn't sound bad, and it's like, put the spurs to her. It's like, that sounds bad. So I'm like, let's just say, well, I'll try to make her go fast. And then, yeah, the major lab will be due like the last official day of class, which I think is the 9th? The 9th, yeah. So, and if you need, like, honestly, if you need extensions, you can ask, right? Like if you need a couple extra days on either end, just ask and I will likely grant that. I am stern but benevolent. I'm not actually that stern, to be perfectly honest. Mostly just benevolent, I think. I hope. At least that's how I hope to be described. And I would apologize for being done with the content a week early, but from Ashley's facial expression, I can guess that no one cares. But okay, let's talk about a couple of things, and we'll see where we are at the end of this class. And we'll go from there. So I want to say a couple extra things about coding, because I know we're all thrilled about the topic. But it occurred to me that I always have this sort of aside when I talk about coding that I forgot to give you. And one of the things that I always say is, especially at like, so, how to explain this? I never did coding at a really high level because I didn't want to pay for NVivo, which is like, and how expensive is NVivo? It's like 139 Australian dollars, which I don't know how much it is in Canadian. So I did all my coding in Word. And all I did for coding, and again, sometimes it can sound like super complicated and complex, right? You need to code and put things in non-overlapping categories, right? You need to, everything has to fit into a category, and these categories have to be exhaustive, right? And non-overlapping. In practicality, right, coding is what you do to make your data make sense so that you can figure out what it says and put it into a sort of useful format so you can get access to it really quickly. So whatever that format is, right? And I'll talk to lots of people who are like, oh my God, you did your coding in Word? That's so derpy. I think my friend actually did call it derpy. Like, why didn't you use like NVivo or blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, I don't know. Didn't know it existed at the time. So that's a thing. Like I just made categories. Like I took interview statements. I made categories. I put them into Word. I copied and pasted them. I knew where they were. That's better. Now I feel like you can see my screen better. And I mean, you only need something like NVivo, I think, for large data sets, right? Like the stuff we're doing at the Center for Criminological Research, where there's hundreds of interviews, I couldn't code that in my brain and put it into Word. That would be impossible. I would forget stuff. I had about 15 interviews, and I had listened to each of them like 20 times. I used them to fall asleep at night at one point. It was like, I'll just listen to my interviews until I fall asleep. So I knew like every beat of those interviews. I knew that data inside and out. And I can still remember, you know, like if you asked me a particular state, go find my dissertation, don't. But if you did, and you were like, who said this? I could probably go into the transcripts, which I still have, and find it for you in about 8 minutes, right? Because I know the data upside down, backwards, and forwards. A statement that I should probably find more depressing than a, you know, brag-worthy, but nevertheless. So it depends, right? Small data sets, you might be better off, you know, working with a really, you know, conventional system like just making categories and putting stuff into those categories in Word, where you can then pull them out and timestamp them and everything all like that. But it doesn't always have to be so super complicated. And I certainly, you know, I just used Word. And I think when I told Phil Badawi that, I think he had a heart attack. He's like, are you kidding? That's insane. And I'm like, yeah. Worked for me. All right, we talked about this, talked about this, talked about this, talked about this, talked about this. Okay. I'm like, how long did that take? 7 minutes. Okay. Does anyone have any pressing personal anecdotes you would like to share? Anyone? A song, maybe. Has anyone seen Wicked? What was your review? My daughter loved it. Okay, I'll move on. I've never ended a class a week early for running out of content, and I'm just a little weirded out by it. So just bear with me while I deal with my own problems. Someone's talking. Are you talking about Wicked? Share. No. Barbie? That's an old movie. Okay. Did you see Oppenheimer instead? That would have been a dark and tragic revelation. Would you like to tell that story in a longer format? I'm sorry, I'm teasing you. Okay. I am really weirded out that I'm running out of content. Usually, like, honestly, take Sociology of Youth with me. And at the end of the class, I'm like, we could do a part 2 of this course because I have so much more to tell you. And in this class, I've just run out of stuff a week early. And it's, again, I cannot come to terms with my own failures. Okay, memos in grounded theory. So, generally speaking, when you're working with interview transcripts, especially, or other kinds of, you know, ethnography, field notes, and such, a lot of people use memos, right? And basically, as you're going through the data, right? So if I were to draw it out for you, and this is your page, people used to do this with actual physical pieces of paper. Obviously now I use comments in Word. You would, you know, you're going through and you see a statement in an interview, and you make a little comment, you know, put it over here, and it's like, okay, this concept, right? So this is, I don't know, going back to what we were talking about last time with our furries example, nature, right? So basically, you put reminders into the text to tell you what you know, provide reminders about what's meant by the terms used, right? So you would put in, okay, so like in your interview, you find a statement where someone uses some particular term, and you would put it in, you know, put any kind of information that's relevant into a memo, right? So what's meant by a term, so what someone says by a term and how that fits into your categories, right? Especially when you're doing kind of comparisons between different cases, different interviews that you've done. These can be really important in sort of helping you sort what's in the ideas, where terms maybe are being reused, where language is being used in a particular way. And they're just notes that you put into whatever you're doing, basically to help you quickly find things and to make sense of terminology, words, concepts that you're seeing in, in the data that you're working with. And they're less formal than, say, codes, right? So they would be less formal than coding your data. They're just there, in helping you kind of make sense of it and find quick reference points to important information, important terms, important stuff that's happening, right? Aid in conceptual and theoretical reflection, creation of concepts and categories, right? So your little notes that you make to yourself, you may then use to like create concepts and categories in coding. Generally, people make memos in their kind of first pass through data, right? So your first pass, as you're saying, reading your transcript for the first time, you put you append things using these little memos to make notes to yourself about anything you think is important and that you might then use to create sort of your categories for coding. Okay. All right, so grounded theory. What are some of the criticisms of grounded theory? So if we go back to our concepts and categories, these terms are a little bit vague, right? Building blocks of a theory, right? Or, important ideas, important ways that things are articulated, things that you think matter and tell you something about the data, ways that the data can be coded together. And then a category which is encompasses two or more concepts, right? And some people will argue that, well, maybe the category itself is just a concept. And so there can be a little bit of confusion as to which is which. Epileptic seizure time. Okay. Yeah, observations and data gathering might not be as theory neutral as claimed. And this kind of goes warm. Oh, well, if I take off the jacket, I lose any place to put my microphone, so I guess I'll keep it. Okay, observation and data gathering might not be as theory neutral as claimed. Right, so the idea in grounded theory is that you come at it, tabula rasa. You come at your research study with no concept of what you're going to find. So, you start doing a study of furries and you have no preconception about furries whatsoever. You're just floating through the furryverse, totally unshaped. But obviously that's not generally true, right? Almost always people will not study something that they don't find interesting, they don't find relevant, that they don't have some kind of idea about in the first place. So this idea of data to theory is probably a little false, except in a few cases, because most people are, especially in an academic context, right, where you already have an expertise in a lot of things, to come at something completely neutral in terms of theory is probably not going to happen. Okay, practical difficulties. Amongst other things, there's all sorts of practical difficulties. One is, oops, did not mean to do that. Okay. Amongst the practical difficulties are all the things you would think, right? Money. Convincing funding organizations to do it. Grounded theory can sometimes sound a little bit less concrete than, say, especially quantitative research. It's like, I'm going to start getting data and just, see what I find, is not a great pitch, right? It's not a great pitch to a funding organization like SHRC. And so getting funding can be a real issue. Time. Right? And especially this question of when you stop in a grounded theory study. When have you reached, saturation? When do you actually get to saturation? When do you stop? When is enough enough, right? And sometimes, you might never reach this, right? Depending on the research question, you might never actually learn everything there is to learn about a subject or get to the point where your new data collection isn't yielding any new or interesting results, or you're not learning anything new. you might actually just be trapped in the loop of data collection, analysis forever. So when do you actually stop? And sometimes, if you're a PhD student, that's when your supervisor says, I'm retiring in 6 months, so you better get yourself graduated before I go, which has never happened, but happens all the time. Or your supervisor dies, which actually did happen to a friend of mine. Their supervisor just suddenly died, and they had to get a new supervisor who then told them, yeah, I didn't really want to be your supervisor. They forced me to. So if we could get this done as quickly as possible, that would be great. Academia is not all fun and games, right? So practical difficulties, time, how much of your life are you going to put into this project? When you get to the PhD level, you have to publish in order to get your tenure and to get your, what do they call them? Merit increments or your more money points on your contract. I am out of more money points, by the way. I cannot get any more money. I've gotten all the money I can get. I am sad. So this is why I'm doing such a terrible job, because, no, I'm kidding. It doesn't matter. I can't get promoted anymore anyway. So you have to publish, right? There are practical implications that might make, grounded theory in its pure sense really, really difficult. Access, right? Access is another one, right? You might hit a wall in terms of access, right? And because we're talking qualitative methods, right? A lot of qualitative studies are based on a snowball kind of sampling method, right? That's my snowball getting bigger down the hill, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. I was really good at art. No, I'm not. Right? You're going to hit a point where that snowball, the slope of it flattens out. And you're like, I was still learning things, but I cannot find anyone else to talk to me about anything. And at that point, you can't really say you've hit saturation. You've hit a wall. Though a wall is not technically an academic term, that is what you have hit, right? There's all sorts of practical difficulties with grounded theory, which is true of all research, right? Sometimes you run out of time, you run out of money, you run out of participants that want to talk to you, and it's like, okay, you just have to end the study, and you're like, I didn't ever reach saturation, but no one wanted to talk to me anymore, so we're done. Okay, it might not result in theory. So again, right, if we look at our steps in grounded theory, right, at step 11 and 12, right, you come to a substantive theory, a theory about your particular case, or a formal theory where you're, relating several kind of cases across different research. But what if you just never get there, right? What if your grounded theory, and this happens, right, where, maybe you didn't do good research design because you didn't pay attention in Intro to Social Methods, and it's followed you all the dark days through your academic journey, and you wish back that you'd had that one extra week of lectures, where you could have learned more about research design. I've never yet had a student, no matter how much they're like, class was okay, I've never yet had a student ever tell me, I wish this course had gone on longer. So it might not result in a theory, especially a formal theory, right? You might not come up with, a really great explanation of the data. It may just kind of yield nothing, right, in terms of bigger explanatory power, and especially formal theories, right? I would say formal theories are pretty rare, right, in a lot of academic research, especially as academic research gets nichier and nichier in a lot of cases. I'm not sure nichier is a word, but I'm going to go with it, right? As it's more neat, every kind of study is more down to a very kind of narrow field. It can make that really, really challenging. And of course, coding might result in fragmentation and loss of narrative flow, right? Sometimes breaking stuff down into like these really neat categories can make you lose a sense of what the data is, right? And what the story is, right? Because at the end of the day, when you have to write about your research study, you're telling a story. And if you code everything to bits, you can kind of lose what that story is, right? Or what the participants were actually telling you. Essentially, right, you lose context, and that can happen. Okay. Okay. I love the word datum. The singular of data is datum, apparently, which is super fun. Okay. Even my hand has given up. Okay. Or I have, this pen is actually really slippery. It's like just metallic, so it just wants to slide all over the place. Okay. Oh, a couple of other coding things. You know, very basic questions. You can read. Do I have? I don't know. Like, do I have to go over these? This is from the textbook again. So, okay, let's just talk about it. All right, what is the general category? This datum. Is this datum an instance of, right? So if you're reading something and you're like, someone tells you, yeah, I really, I started dressing as a furry because I really wanted to reconnect with my childhood or something, right? Like, okay, what category of datum is this? I'm just gonna say data. Datum is this. Okay, right? So what does that fit in your bigger categories? What does it represent, right? So what is it telling you? What is it about? Like, what are they talking about? What general themes are there? What questions does the thing you're reading, the data, suggest, right? Is it telling you to look somewhere else for other things, right? Is it telling you need to dig deeper into certain issues, that you've underthought certain things? What sort of answer to that question does it imply? And then just a bunch of context questions. What's happening? What are people doing? Especially if you're doing ethnography, right? That matters in terms of the data. Oops, I'm sorry. What do people say they're doing, right? So what's their interpretation of things? And all these sorts of things, right? And this, it's really all about building that narrative. Because at the end of the day, this is true of quantitative research and qualitative research. Doing the research is one thing. Telling people about the research is really, at the end of the day, a form of storytelling. Right? So figuring out, when we're talking about creating codes or creating some way of categorizing your data, is all about bringing that story out, right? Writing up the research in a lot of ways is the most important part. A, because that's the part that gets you promoted, or it gets you your PhD or your master's or whatever. But it's also how people find out, right? If you do research and never tell anyone about it, does it make a sound? No one's going to know, right, about all the cool things that you found. And so the storytelling is the important part. So the coding, like, always think of coding as being in service of narrative, of the story that you're going to tell about your data, right? I thought you had your hand up and I got very excited for a second, like, oh, a question. No, never mind. Okay, I'm sorry. Do you have a question? No, okay, good. A long personal anecdote. No, I'm kidding. Okay. All right, so steps to consider in coding. Okay, code and transcribe as soon as possible. You want to be as close to the data as you can be, right? So that you can include as much context. Field notes are also helpful with this, right? Include anything from your field notes that's useful. Review your field notes before you transcribe, code and transcribe. Actually, technically, those should be inverted because you want to transcribe before you code. But you want to do it as soon as possible, right? Again, when stuff is fresh in your mind, when you have as much sense of the data as possible. Read through the data before considering an interpretation. And this is, what's kind of colloquially kind of spoken of in academia, know your data, right? Know it like it's your best friend. Know it like it's the Facebook page of that person you used to date and you're now stalking, right? Know everything about your data. Every breath it takes, every move it makes, you have to be watching it. No, obviously that sounds creepier than I meant it to be. But you need to know it, right, backwards and forwards, read through it and be constantly kind of interacting with it as you're interpreting it. Read through the data again. Or listen to it as you try to fall asleep, right? Note keywords, themes, do coding. So, Know your data ×2, right? Don't be concerned with producing too many codes, right? Sometimes, and this happens a lot to people who are doing it for the first time. You produce a lot of codes, and part of that is you're just nervous, right? You're like, I don't want to miss any important data, so I'm going to create like 200 codes. That's 200. And basically what you do is on your second pass through the data, have I mentioned you're going to be spending a lot of time reviewing codes and reviewing data and going through it again and again and again? You clean it up, right? And probably what you do is you merge codes, right? You're like, actually, these two codes are basically the same thing. You merge them, you delete things that you don't think are important anymore. You can tidy this up, later on. And again, it's an ongoing and iterative process of interpreting the data, right? And as you're, doing your steps, what are they, steps 4 through 7 over and over again in that process, you're generating new data, new codes, and you're going to go back through the stuff you created and merge it, create new categories that encompass more than one thing. But don't be worried about, overdoing it. It can look really overwhelming when you have a lot of codes, but it's not that big a deal. Okay, and yeah, basically you review codes, consider associations, especially redundancies, relationships to existing concepts, right? You're going to merge lots of things as you're going through, delete codes, move things, oh, I have this whole category, but really I can move this one over here, and then delete that category altogether, right? So you do lots of that in coding. Yeah, I mean, this is all, you start kind of steps of interpretation, consider general theoretical ideas, start thinking about interpretations as you move through the data. And this one, key, keep coding in perspective. How to put this? Coding is not the project. If you're spending too much time, doing coding, it's kind of like if you're doing quantitative research, statistical analysis is not the project, right? Figuring out what the data means and the story is the project. Coding is not the project, right? So keep it in perspective. Don't spend too much time doing it, right? Consider, the code's broader significance, the research project, interpretation, the relevance to the existing literature, to the lives of the people studied, and don't spend all of your time doing it, and don't obsess about it, right? And don't obsess especially with perfection. It doesn't have to be perfect. No project is perfect. Your future research projects are not going to be perfect either if you end up doing any, so don't worry about it. Don't get too worked up. Okay. Talked about these a little bit with grounded theory, problems with coding, losing context, right? It's kind of like that thing where if you say a word 1,000 times, right, suddenly it doesn't seem like it means what it should mean. This is kind of the thing with coding too. If you break up the data too much into too small of categories, right, or you just start to live within the codes, you can lose the context, right? And the context is key, right? In qualitative research, context is king. Because again, you can't report on a bunch of disconnected categories, but you're telling a story, right? And that story is built in the context, right? By selecting part of the text. Qualitative coding weakens connection between description and the social setting, right? So you always have to kind of fight that, where you could, break all of your data into such small categories that you kind of lose the meaning of it. So you've got to fight that by, again, know the data. Know the data, and then you'll always know the context. And the fragmentation of data, losing that narrative, creating partial interpretations, leaving out important things, right? I mean, just think of it this way. If you pull out like a block of text, right, where, someone was talking about the kind of fruit cereals that children eat, right, and their relationship to fruity breakfast cereals, right? And you just pull out like a certain number of quotes, right? And it's like, yeah, my son loves Frosted Flakes. My son loves Fruit Loops. My son loves, I don't know why it's always a boy. My daughter loves Captain Crunch, right? Girls only eat healthy food. I guarantee you on my way home, my daughter will be like, can we pick up McDonald's? Because every time she's in the car with me, she wants McDonald's. And I'm like, no, it's not as cheap as it used to be. Right, you might have all these codes saying, okay, you know, kids, all these kids love breakfast cereal, but, you know, the following statements in all of them was, but mom doesn't let me have it, right? I want to pick all of the marshmallows out of the Lucky Charms, but mom doesn't let me, right? So it's like, you might conclude from this data that it's like, oh my God, children are eating nothing but unhealthy cereal because it's the only thing they like, and miss that part, right? So fragmentation you can lose the context, the flow of the narrative, or create partial interpretations, right? The breakfast cereal industry is going to kill us all, but thankfully mom is there to save you at the end of the day, right? From making terrible choices. All right. This is not looking good for Friday, friends. How long can I linger on any of these? Oh, okay. Let's just get it done. Okay. Really hot. My tea is too hot. My mug is too good. I made this like 2 hours ago and it's still scaldingly hot. So it is the best mug I've ever had, sadly. Okay, so basic coding, right? Simple labels for material, you know, negative, positive consequences of analyzed activities, right? So it's like, you know, I'm trying to think of an example, right? Basic coding, you might sort it into like very, very general and superficial categories, right? So let's say, you know, breakfast cereals. I don't know why that example's in my head. You know, you have statements about healthy and unhealthy. And you start with these kind of basic codings, right? Or foods, right? You start with like favorite foods and foods that kids hate. You're doing a study of kids' attitudes about food. Maybe that one's a little easier, you know, and you sort all your statements into love and hate. I turned on the highlighter for some reason. This has been happening to me all day. I quit you, intro to methods. I'm done. Just let me finish it. Love and hate. Okay, right? So, very basic categories, right? Superficial analysis needs to be followed by other steps. Deeper awareness of the content of text. So you rework those basic codes to more fully reflect the content of like interviews, your field notes, your observations from ethnography, right? So then you would create other codes under these, right, that get at more of the nuance and where you can build more context. And then, you know, exploring broader analytic themes, you know, where you take the ideas that are in your text and use them to sort of look at the topic on a broader level. Okay, so computer software in qualitative analysis. Like I said, a lot of people now use basically coding software to do a lot of it. Computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, or CACDAS, which, by the way, no one actually uses that acronym, but it is fun to say. It's sometimes fun to just read acronyms for no reason because they sound more awkward than just saying computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software. Okay, so advantages of this, obviously, eliminates most, if not all, clerical tasks associated with manual coding and retrieving data. A lot of these are drag and drop, right? Certainly in Vivo, you would load either a Word file or a PDF of your data, like say an interview, into it, and you would highlight and drag those statements into categories, right? And it would just do all of this for you. So unlike, me and my derpy way of coding stuff, you're not having to like copy and paste and go through a Word file that ends up being 55 pages long, looking for particular quotes or categories or whatever. There's lots of these. This one, if you're working at U of A, say especially on like the prison project, NVivo is by far the most popular one. However, you don't like NVivo? You made a face. Like, weird things about NVivo is it exists for both Mac and PC. However, the Mac and PC versions are weirdly not compatible with each other. So like if your team is working on the Mac version and you have a PC, when you go to access it, it like completely scrambles the data. So like I don't use a Mac because I'm a good person. No, I'm kidding. I'm just joking. Macs are fine. One person even has the glowy apple kind, which means it's old. I'm like, hey, that's a glowing apple. Like the eye of the Cyclops, it stares at me, which means it's like pre-2017 or something like that. There's weird stuff like the Mac. Like if I access the NVivo software on the prison project, I would 100% scramble the data for everybody. So like I don't, because I'm not working on the data side of it right now. But there's a rule that everybody has to have a Mac. And because I refuse to sell my soul, I don't have a Mac. So I will never work on that data. Yeah, it will sort the data once the codes are defined, right? So once you set things up, but they don't interpret the data. That is still left to human beings. Or, increasingly, this is an argument, and it's a really stupid one, but people have been making that we don't need humans anymore because we can just feed our data sets into AI and let the AI do the analysis for us. And I'm like, but where's the fun in that? Also, I've read papers written by AI and they're really dumb. So I can just imagine a world where a bunch of academics start feeding their data into AI and seeing what comes out. Feels like it would be very uninspiring. But, these pieces of software until the day that, and this day is probably coming, where it's like NVivo, now with Microsoft Copilot built in. It can do your data analysis for you as well. That day has not come, but eventually AI is going to come. But for now, they don't interpret the data for you or anything like that. Okay, enough of, more of Cactus. Okay, advantages of using software. Yeah, there's some cool ones. Like I know Max QDA, which I've played around with a little bit, has some really cool visualization things. Like if you ask it to, it will visualize your data in really interesting ways, right? So it'll be like, you've loaded all your interviews into it and you've coded things, and it will say like, okay, it'll give you a pie chart for one of your codes, and it'll say, okay, like, this many people had this theme in, this many didn't. Bar graphs of your most common themes, right? Kind of, they're good for like helicopter height kind of views of your data sometimes, right? If you fly up in a helicopter, you can see the city in a different way, as opposed to if you're on the ground. These pieces of software will often especially visualize it in ways that can be really appealing and really help you to understand it, which stimulates, I love the phrasing that I used here, stimulates its holistic perception and points of connection between ideas and concepts. But that's it, right? Like you go, not quite airliner height, but let's say helicopter height above the data. Sometimes you can see things that you couldn't see, on the ground. So allows to estimate how representative different quotes are from qualitative interviews, right? How common certain themes are, how many themes are shared with other things, right? So you can select a particular quote and it'll tell you like, well, this relates to all these other quotes. We see all the same themes in all of these things, right? Especially if you sort one quote into multiple categories, it'll connect all of those things for you in a way that your brain probably is not capable of doing. And it somewhat improves the transparency of qualitative analysis, because typically as you're writing your method section, you're going to say, hey, I used, NVivo or Max QDA. I don't know why I can't remember that. Max QDA to do this, and describe how you use the qualitative data analysis software to do your analysis, right? So then people are like, okay, if I have this data set, right? So if, say you had to upload your data set to a publicly available database, people could repeat it, right? So it makes it more transparent. Okay. Criticisms of using software. I mean, aside from the fact that it takes all the fun out of it and you spend even more time at a computer than you otherwise might. Yeah, there's a lot of it can quantify coded text and can negate those qualitative themes, right? So it'll give you, like I was saying, right, it'll show you, okay, 80% of your participants said this, or 80% of your participants had these codes in it, right? So it does tend to lead to either a quantification or a quasi-quantification of a lot of your data. Again, it fragments the textual material into small pieces of data, and you can lose the context. I will say, I guess this is even more the case. I think, like, if you're the one who's doing all of the analysis, it's probably less of a problem. If you're part of a team, I clicked the button on the pen by accident. Fixed. If you're part of a team, right, and you have, we'll say 3 people, because that's the most I care to draw, and all of you did a third of the work, right? You might not have that holistic vision of the data because you're not actually looking through all the data. You're only looking through your part and then seeing the codes. So it can fragment things, especially when there's inter-coder kind of action going on. Okay. I don't know about this one as much, but it's in the textbook, so we'll say it's too closely built around grounded theory and diminishes other key strengths of qualitative research. Its flexibility, right? Yeah, I guess coding, because coding is such a big part of specifically grounded theory work, and in one of its steps, a lot of these pieces of software are kind of based in grounded theory. So it sort of forces you in some ways into that grounded theory framework, and can move you out of some other kinds of ways of doing things. Okay, how many slides do I have left? How much time do I have left? I have 8 minutes. 3 slides. Can I do 3 slides in 8 minutes? You believe in me? Okay. Okay. Or should we just stop and come back on Friday for 3 slides? I'm just kidding. Okay, let's do it. I'm going to stop stalling and just go with it. Please don't hate me or write the department that I finished the course a week early. I'm sorry. I tried. I stretched this out as much as I could. Okay, so narrative analysis. Researching stories people tell to understand their life and their world. So how would this typically work? And narrative analysis is a very peculiar kind of way of doing research. It's really interesting when people do it. So instead of, like, me going and interviewing Marie or Ashley or someone like that, I would just, sit down with them. It's still kind of an interview, but instead of asking them a bunch of questions, I ask them to just tell me a story, right? Tell me the story of what happens. And you analyze the story that they tell you. There's a whole field of, say, like, narrative criminology. Since I know a lot of you are crim students, Lois Presser is one of the big names in that particular field. I don't really get it. This is one of those research methods that I've always been like, seems a little quirky and weird to me, but qualitative research is about being quirky and weird, so there you go. But yeah, it's focused on the context, events, and interpretations people make of them. So you're asking people, tell their story, tell you what they made of them. And again, yeah, it shifts from what happened, a more historical account, to how people make sense of things. It's all about, again, that lived experience of participants. Okay, so 4 models of narrative analysis. Thematic, right? Examines what is said rather than how it is said, right? So what are the themes in what people say, rather than, the style of storytelling. The structural examines the way a story is told, what is emphasized to increase persuasiveness, right? So how do people tell their stories? What things do they stress maybe? Are there things they come back to over and over again? The construction of narrative is the key there. The interactional examines the dialogue between the teller and the listener. I have never seen anyone do this. I'm sure it exists. It sounds super interesting, but to even describe it, I honestly am not exactly sure what it looks like. Examines the dialogue, co-construction between the teller and the listener. I feel like that would make a lot of sense in like oral cultures, but I don't know, I don't know what to make sense of it. And the performance examines narrative as performance, right? So how are people creating the stories, and how is each instance of a person telling the same story different is what you would find in narrative analysis. Okay. Criticisms. Narrative analysis over relies on story and gives preference to accounts of participants, right? As the only explanation, right? So it's very subjective is one of the criticisms, right? Because it just goes down to lived experience, and that's seen as paramount, and can often, not look at context, not look at actual historical facts, but just what people made of things. Yeah, sometimes people take stories at face value. The researcher can take stories at face value instead of looking into the bigger context. And especially, when you're sympathetic to the storyteller, sometimes it can lead to not taking a critical stance. Whereas, taking a critical stance can help understand the motives, social situation of the teller, and broad social conditions in which the story is told. Okay. I mark it like this for the people at home who aren't here. Okay, so that is it. That is it. I have no more content. I have used it all. Don't seem so happy. Ashley's just happy to be rid of me. I'm just teasing you. Okay, so that's the end of the course. So no class on Friday, I guess. I will be in my, oh yeah, please. A question. You cannot find it. Well, let me look. Okay. Why am I thinking of submitting a maintenance request? I don't know. No, I don't know. I don't know why. I joke, but I have no idea why I was on that page either. Of course it is. Okay. Major lab 2. Oh, I didn't post it. All right, I will swear I had the rubric for it posted. Oh, I will post the assignment then. I have 2 minutes. Why don't I do that now? I will post that. And I thought I had it posted, but I will put it up and you will be set to go. Before I leave this room, it shall be done. But you may leave at any point. I have to find it. It's going to take a sec. Unshare. Okay. Well, have fun. I will be around Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday again. If you have any questions, my office is just 1 floor up in the Center for Criminological Research until such a point as I get kicked out. Who knows when that'll happen. Okay. I had it up. How about 2? All right. Okay. Let me go to. Have a good one. Thanks for letting me know about that. Hey. Oh, it's hot here. Okay. You're welcome. Have a good one. Yes, the exam is in person, in this room, on whatever date it is. I'll send out an email. Perfect. The trauma is the point. Let's see. Have a good rest of your day. Okay. No more folder. Fractal. I'll just, yeah, sure. I had something I needed to tell you, Ashley. So, have you done all of the training for Don't Bother? So they just cut basically a whole bunch of people that they had trained, and they're like, "Oh, we actually have nothing for them to do," and I'm like, "Oh, super duper." So I mean, you can finish it, and you can always put that you did the training on your CV, but they just cut a whole bunch of people.
you.